Hi, this show talks about books that feature mental health topics. The discussion will be from the point of view of mental health professionals. There are many books that include this topic, and my hope is that more and more people know about them because they help to decrease the stigma and help people not feel so alone in their struggle. Today, we will be talking about the book Why. It's a children's book written by Adam Rex, illustrated by Claire Keene, which has something to do with a young child who meets an adult who wants to rule the world. I am your host, Robin Tamanaha, licensed marriage and family therapist, and today's guest is Melissa Munoz. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being my guest. Would you like to say a few things about yourself before we get started?
Sure, so I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. My main kind of passion when it comes to therapy is working with younger children, especially the newborn to 5-year-olds. And being that that's the population that I like working with, I also have a lot of just personal interests that kind of go along with that age group, such as children's literature.
Nice. And what's your experience? Do you also have experience working with the young kids?
I do. So most of my experience comes from working actually with youth in general, so up to age 21. But I have specialty training in the 0 to 5, the newborn to 5 population.
Nice. So, I know I briefly described the book in the beginning. Would you like to go a little deeper into what this book is? And then we can start to talk about different parts of the book that were important and about mental health?
Yeah, sure. So, in a nutshell, the book it's a children's book. It's meant for, the age group of 3 years old to 5 years old, so about toddler age to the beginning of school age. It's a very attractive book. It has a lot of bright kind of colors on the cover, and the pages themselves are drawn. Really, there's a lot of detail to it, so it's definitely appropriate for that age group in terms of holding their attention. The book in general is about this man who kind of comes in to the story as an angry kind of scientist that just charges into a mall and wants to take over the world, he says. And the book just kind of follows an interaction that happens between him and actually a small child who looks like she's probably no more than 3 or 4. And the interaction they have is really important and really interesting because through the interaction you get to really know more about the scientist and why he's barging into the mall. Initially I think we want to be quick to just dislike him and throw him into the role of villain and bad guy that needs to be defeated. But I think the book does a good job of kind of, through the girl, showing us how if we just kind of sit back and allow yourself or allow someone else to kind of speak their story and put words to whatever behavior or feeling is happening for them at the moment, it can really kind of change the outcome. Because the usual story is bad guy breaks in, chaos happens, a hero or somebody has to come in to stop him, and then crisis averted, right? Bad guy goes to jail. But with what the girl does, which is just pausing and kind of asking this question over and over again, why, which is what the book is called, it actually completely changes the outcome. And I think it's a pretty powerful thing. The fact that just the simple action of the girl asking why really changes the outcome. And I think that there's a lot of important messages in this story because of that.
Definitely. Yeah, this sounds really interesting. And it sounds very, like you said, the main thing is her asking why. So it sounds very straightforward, however, very, very meaningful. So how about we delve into different parts of the book? Were there a certain parts of the book that you felt, whether it was through the interactions you just mentioned or asking why, or how the man that kind of barged into the mall was, that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, sure. So something that I think the book does a really good job with is using visuals to be able to really just communicate different things, not only what the scientist is experiencing, but also just kind of showing how our own reaction to people that are perhaps, coming off as aggressive or upset or sad or whatever the negative emotion is, our actions and our behaviors also have an impact on, where the interaction can go, whether it's in a kind of resolved in a peaceful way or a not so peaceful way where someone has to come in and like drag the upset person out, right? So visuals, yeah. This being a children's book, of course, it's all pictures mostly. There's some text, of course. It's mostly the scientist's dialogue and the girl asking why over and over again. But if you look at the visuals, there's an interesting sort of rhythm that happens. In the beginning, there's a lot of kind of like the bold facial expressions that are happening. If you look at the scientist, he's got like these really big eyebrows and he's like yelling. His face is like red from the yelling, signifying the anger. And if you look at even the text that his dialogue is written in on the pages, it looks like kind of that action comic book style text with the really pointy spikes and all caps. So anyway, the beginning visuals very much depict the kind of aggression and the frustration that is just happening at the beginning with him breaking into this mall and just screaming that he wants to take over the world and that, everybody needs to like basically like bow down to him and everybody's running away screaming. All these visuals of panic, of anger, kind of like how we feel when we ourselves are kind of in that space of feeling very emotional or just everything seems really intense at the moment. And then maybe later on, once we've cooled off, we're a little bit more calm and easier to like think things through. But I think the book does a good job of showing what it's like for people on the outside of the situation and inside of the situation, how intense and aggressive things just kind of seem.
Yeah, it's so interesting, like with illustrated books, or we see this also with like animation, how like the way the visuals are set really does set the stage and kind of put out there what they're trying to convey. Like when you mentioned the eyebrows, the first thing I thought of was a villain, because I always think like with villain, they always have like really great like big eyebrows, but also, what you said about, the all caps, and you mentioned like aggression. So I get the sense that like what it's conveying in the beginning is this very much like, here I am, I'm in your face, you're going to listen to me, I'm loud, I'm here, you're going to do what I say. Is that kind of what's being depicted in a sense?
Yeah, exactly. So he comes off as very aggressive, in the way he's drawn, his body language, his gestures, a lot of like arm movements. He's like jetting around in his like jetpacks. They're like boots that have jetpacks on it. So yeah, it's like very kind of this over the top aggressive presence that he has to kind of scare people into like respecting him or like giving him the floor, right?
Yeah.
It's like you're afraid of this person, you're going to listen to them and you're going to like not want to make them more mad basically and possibly make them like do something scary or worse.
Is that what had happened? Like, did it kind of do, because it sounds like that's the outcome that he probably wanted, too, is like, I'm here. But so when he barges through and like he has that here I am presence, listen to me, I'm loud, here's my eyebrows kind of thing, is that what had happened, or like how were people kind of reacting in that moment?
I think that it does the job, initially him being really loud and angry and shouting does the job of giving him the control in terms of people not trying to fight him, right? Initially, they're just running away.
Got it.
Of course, even though at the moment, maybe people are not challenging him, that doesn't mean that in the long run, somebody's not going to come along, like police officer or a hero or somebody to try to kind of basically subdue him, right? To take him down. And then in that case, he's not setting himself up to be heard, right? So initially, I do think that it does give him the control and power. Initially, everybody does run away except for one person, and that's the little girl who's kind of the star of the book. And the little girl is the only person left there standing in front of him, and that's when she begins to ask him why. Her first question, why, had to do with what he said about, like, oh, I'm gonna take over the world. Well, why? And then it just launches into this narrative where piece by piece, he's able to kind of explain and go backwards as to the motivation of why he's there. What led him to that point. And it goes as far back, actually, to his childhood.
Oh, wow. So how would you feel about kind of delving into that? I'm kind of curious what the background is of this villain, or kind of where it's all coming from.
Yeah, so the book does a really good job of kind of covering a lot of ground in terms of his own personal story. So you have this intro with him breaking into the mall, and then the girl is the only one that kind of not stands up to him, but is willing to kind of stand beside him and really sort of understand things from his perspective by asking that question. And then it peels backwards in terms of his motivation of everything that led up to where he is now. For example, the reason why he even got the idea and the power behind, some of his inventions, including the rocket boots and his indestructible coat that he talks about, is that some kind of like meteor crash landed on his house when he was an adult. And that gave him the feeling of, I'm destined to do something great. This rare meteor with these rare materials that I can use for this special stuff. It's not an accident. It happened to me. So he was starting to kind of create meaning out of that. And even before that, though, there was something that sort of led the stage to him, I think, taking such kind of an aggressive approach to trying to control people or trying to get them to listen to him. And that is, by the girl continuing to ask why, he ends up going all the way back to his childhood and talking about, in essence, just not feeling understood, not feeling seen, not feeling heard by others, whether that were other, like, kids or other people in the society. And also his father. So his, one of his main attachment figures. And something that I focus on a lot when it comes to working with younger kids is that attachment, that connection that they have with their parents. So for him, he was interested as a child in this hobby, basically, using yarn to create things, crocheting, things like that. He tried to have his own business. He was very passionate about it. And it didn't work out. It folded. Nobody was really interested. He kind of was made fun of. You can see that in the pictures of the book. And, when something like that happens, what do? Especially as a child, you kind of turn to your security, your secure place, which would be your parents, for comfort or reassurance. And I think instead of him being seen and heard in a way that he thought he wanted, which was, maybe to be reassured or encouraged to continue, pursuing the hobby. Instead, he received the answer, which was, his dad saying, you need to be a doctor. Everybody in the family's a doctor. This is the way to go. Like, this is just what you're expected to do. Like, that was the answer. So that, I think, left him feeling very much like he wasn't fitting in with whatever the status quo wanted, whatever his father wanted for him. And I think that built up, again, this is just a children's book, but from a psychological perspective, something like that, an event like that happening, actually has a big impact on a child, because it kind of embeds a message that if it doesn't ever become challenged, will continue to grow like a tree as they become an adult. And that message that he had was that, perhaps he wasn't good enough unless he became a doctor, which he did. And that other people don't understand him and won't understand him, and he's not like other people, and he kind of has to maybe be a little bit more forceful or aggressive when it comes to getting his needs met.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, and So what I'm hearing is, one, he was interested in something that sounds very different than what the males in his family were doing, right? They were all previous doctors, and what he was doing was this something that's more artsy, you know. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
using your brain in a different creative way, right? So it's like here he was kind of just trying to do it, and he sounded really interested in, and just the letdown, you know, of it not working out, let alone being teased by others. And then on top of that, like told like here's only one thing that's acceptable, and the only thing that's acceptable is being a doctor like everyone else. And I didn't, and when you explain it too, I didn't get a sense of like any comfort, right? Like you were explaining, or you know, at least talking about it. It was like, okay, well, you need to do this, and this is probably why you need to just do this one profession, right? And it's kind of ironic too that he actually did end up becoming a doctor, more like a scientist doctor, you know. And I wonder too, like being that his father was his attachment figure and did, we call it modeling, right, kind of set the stage for how to interact and how to behave. The beginning of the book sounds, I wonder if it's kind of like similar to Dad, but just in a louder way, because he was like barging through the mall and like yelling, and or at least, you know, the font's like all caps, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. So, yeah, something I think that ends up happening is you have this person, like the scientist, who maybe didn't feel that they were very heard or supported or understood as a child, and then they want to grow up and kind of make something of themselves or prove themselves or accomplish something in order to get that need met, the need of I do belong or I am enough. And what's ironic is, like you said, he actually ends up kind of turning into his father, who was the person that he kind of was trying not to be as a child, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not to be just this person that um did what he was told and grew up to be a doctor like everybody else, all the other males in the family. Is somebody that was more just kind of creative and trying to follow their passion, like something they really were passionate about. And instead, he grows up to be the opposite. He's doing something he doesn't really necessarily want to do, you know, being a scientist. He wanted to do something more artsy and creative. And he ends up taking on this persona that doesn't really reflect who he was as a child at all either.
So
So
kind
yeah,
of turned into Dad.
that's a good point. That's interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
So could you kind of fill me in on what this process was like? Because it sounds like this young girl was very much the one going along with him, and like his thought process and coming to the point where he's like now like explaining, right? He's like explaining why he wants to rule the world and all that. So what did that look like, and how did the little child really help with that?
So something that is really important, that I think this book shows, is just the power of being able to be present with someone, not trying to necessarily change things for them, fix things, give advice, just to kind of be present, to allow someone to just have their experience, to listen to them, and kind of come more from a place of understanding. Like you're putting yourself in their you're yourself in their shoes, trying to see what they're thinking and why they feel the way they feel, and just kind of joining them in that. And I think she does that simply just, you know, like with the title of the book, it's called Why, and the reason it's called Why is because that is the one word, such a tiny word, that had such a huge impact on the scientist in this story. And the reason I'm saying it has a huge impact is, you know, she is just repeating this question, just allowing him to kind of give his point of view, allowing him to actually talk about what he's feeling and why. Why is he feeling that way? Where is this coming from, right? And when someone is allowed to do that, I think it does two things. I think one, for you, if you're the person listening, it allows you to understand where their behavior's coming from. In terms of not just necessarily like looking at them like they're a bad person, or you know, that they're aggressive, throwing on any labels. You're really just trying to understand what their intentions are, what they're trying to achieve, and that allows more space to then afterwards have a better outcome. To have a resolution where it's like, okay, like I see where you're coming from. I see what it is you need and want. Why don't we talk about that? Like how do we get your needs met? How do we get you to be heard in a way and understood and accepted in a way that doesn't involve you going to jail for the rest of your life because of this terrorist threat, basically, is what he was doing, right, at the mall. So that's one thing. The other thing too is that for the person that is actually upset, the person that is being listened to, it is able to help let the emotions get out of them. It helps to switch their brain from going to this kind of volcanic eruption of emotions to bringing online the part of our brains that are actually involved when it comes with thinking clearly, rationally, really thinking through what you're doing and understanding cause and effect and consequences so that we can kind of make better choices. And I do believe that the book does a good job of showing both of those things. One, how the girl is able to kind of understand, and we're able, from the girl's questions, to understand him. Our feelings about him change as the story goes, at least mine did. I definitely felt way more empathetic and felt bad for him, hearing about his childhood. And I saw him as more human, because I think we can all think of a time when we were in that position of feeling just maybe so angry or so sad, and maybe from the outside, looking really aggressive or out of control and messy from other people's perspectives, but we were just in a lot of pain, very much hurt. So I think that, it helps us connect to it in that way, and then it also kind of helps model, her asking the why question modeled for the scientist how to really start to also peel back. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I feeling what I'm feeling? That self-awareness piece.
Yeah, and too, it also sounds like even just that question, why, and I don't know if it's because, she's so young as well. There's that like curiosity aspect, and just wanting to know like how come or why, like kids will usually ask that question, or just really, just wanting to hear his story, you know what I mean? So it's interesting because it's like that piece, just like that being curious piece really allowed him to, what you were saying is like being heard. Like I didn't get the sense that when he was with his father, he was heard at all. He was kind of just like being talked to. So essentially, and this is something that also happens like in therapy, right? We call this like kind of this corrective emotional experience, which is pretty much like having the opportunity to have a positive experience, be heard, feel understood in a way that you weren't able to before. Maybe because of the experiences in the past relationships, all that. So it sounds like what the young girl gave him was this corrective emotional experiences, like just really wanting to get to know it and listening, and not even saying her own thoughts on it, or her own feedback. It was just continuously like, okay, like peeling back the onion layers, like even more and more, like how come? And I think that also helped him like delve deeper. And he may not have even like had that opportunity before, which is unfortunate because now he's like, an adult, but thankfully he did have it, better late than never, and it just so happened to have been with this young child. So it just, to me, that sounds so powerful, that he finally got that opportunity, and through that he got a response that he probably deserved all along, right? Which is hearing him out and having someone else look at him and view him compassionately, right? And being seen for what things were and what his experience was, and what he wanted, his passion, all that. Like, that must have been so powerful for him, in the way. So I'm wondering, like, she continuously asks this question, why? So, and this is a children's illustrated book. So as this was happening, did he change? Like the picture, like the way he looked, or maybe the font, like, and kind of like what were like scenes maybe? I don't know if the book had, certain pictures and that kind of showed like not only him talking about his process, but sometimes when this happens, people's body language or their voice and all these different things change,
Yeah, exactly. So that's that is something that definitely we get to witness as the book is going along, and she's, asking this question, and he's continuing to peel back layers of his story. Initially, like I said, he comes off as very aggressive. He broke into the mall through the roof in a very over-the-top manner, breaks through the glass, he's screaming, he has his jetpack boots on, terrifying everybody. As the story continues, even when the girl first approaches him, he's still kind of, you can tell, doing some, like, what we would call aggressive body language. Arms kind of, like, thrown about, kind of like a frown or a really, like, angry expression on his face. Just signals that we would usually interpret as, I don't want to be anywhere near that person. They could be dangerous, right? They could harm me or someone else. And as the pages start to progress, you notice that he's still kind of angry in the beginning as she's starting to barely talk to him. He's just kind of charging around the mall and going into different stores, or even at one point I think they were riding like a certain children's ride. Uh-huh. And his text and dialogue still looks kind of intense, the way that it's drawn. But once it gets to the point where he starts peeling back, why he wants to take over the world, which is, to be able to make the rules, to be able to make people see things the way he wants them to see things and value things that he wants them to value, which in this case is the yarn, right? Mm-hmm. It shows this image of him thinking up the world the way he wants it to be, and it's just a world that's completely basically made out of yarn and people admiring the yarn. So that's kind of like the climax point in which we get to see, like, okay, so this is why he's being aggressive. He wants to force people to see and think and feel this way. And then right after that, aggressive point where he's basically saying everybody has to feel and think this way. The girl asks why, and then we see this huge sort of flip happen that's really interesting because you see his face change. His face changes and he all of a sudden looks really sad and kind of sorrowful, and then he says, because, nobody understands me, basically. And then from that point on, for the rest of the book, you start to slowly see the anger really melt away, and instead of what comes up is that sadness that comes from his childhood of feeling just like everything going on inside of him, maybe the passion he had for yarn and the disappointment he was feeling about it not taking off, how that didn't seem to match the rest of the world. Not only like, other people, like strangers, right, that weren't interested in the business, or the other kids that you see in the book that have a lemonade stand and are kind of making fun of him, but even his own flesh and blood, right, his dad. And if strangers can't relate to you, let alone your own flesh and blood, that's pretty alienating. So you can see that pain start to kind of come out in the rest of the book. You see his facial expressions turn more sad and soft. You see his body language different, because you even see a part where he's, it looks like he's kind of laying down on like a couch that like Freud would have used, like back in the psychoanalytical days, where the girl is sitting in the position of where the therapist would be, and then he's laying on this like Freud-like couch.
It's like, tell me about your mother couch.
Yeah.
That's what we used to call it.
Yeah.
What a change from like barging into a mall where everyone's scattering to now like just being relaxed and laying down on this couch, like telling like your backstory.
Exactly.
It's very symbolic.
Yeah, well, exactly. It is, because he comes in from being standing up or flying around and running around the mall, charging around, to this very vulnerable position, if you think about it. Yeah. And I'm sure it was drawn for a reason, the tell me about your mother couch, like you said. he's laying down on it. And if you think about that scene, he's in a very vulnerable position.
Yeah.
One, it's symbolically vulnerable because in therapy we are vulnerable, right? We're really trying to speak our truths and really saying how we really feel and think, which isn't always very comfortable. It is not always something we're proud of. And then two, physically he's vulnerable because now he's just laying flat on his back, laying down, no sort of aggressive behaviors to protect him.
Yeah.
And then for the rest of the book, really it just continues in that pattern of showing him in a less aggressive and kind of superficially angry or evil way, and more of just a person that is just trying to kind of talk about their pain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's huge. And when you describe that, like, I do picture kind of just the evolution of that, like, and two, it's really interesting because, I mean, when we think too of like good, solid, positive support systems, that's essentially what's provided, right? It's just letting someone express how they feel and then just being just listening to them, and what that does and how it just will allow someone to feel very relaxed, a lot more comfortable. No one's trying to change what your answers are. They're not trying to talk you out of something or thinking like they do. It's like just fully being like seen and heard.
Yeah, exactly. So I like the point you made about the attachment piece, having like a good positive or a secure attachment. That's something that we try as therapists to really help people achieve with their relationships in their life, whether it's a parent-child relationship or like a partner-to-partner relationship or a friend and a friend. It doesn't matter. But the reason why attachment is so huge and why it's something I focus on, especially with the younger kids, is because that really kind of colors the rest of your world.
Yeah.
Not only your external world, how you connect with others and get your needs met, but your internal world too. Do you feel safe? Do you feel heard? Do you feel secure? Or do you feel insecure? And if you feel insecure, how is that expressed? Are you trying to aggressively get your needs met by being demanding and kind of demeaning of others? Are you anxious and kind of like chasing after others? Are you hot and cold and running to and running away from others? And something that, we have to stop and think about with the scientist that we kind of I came to realize was, well, he doesn't have a secure attachment. He doesn't have a secure attachment to himself. He didn't get that growing up because the message was that you're not okay the way you are, right? You need to kind of change. He didn't feel safe, heard, understood, or secure with his parent figure, his dad. And all of that has translated to now he's this adult who is very much insecure. So much to the point, if you really think about it, that he thinks it takes, having to have this complete and absolute control over the whole world in order to achieve the kind of safety and peace, I guess, internal peace that he's been looking for this whole time.
Yeah, it's almost like a kind of like a blown up version of the father in a way, right? Where he just kind of like one up dad in how he was going to get his needs met. And two, if we think about like attachment figure, and if we think about the scientist's father, the father may not have necessarily thought he was doing anything bad. Sometimes it happens where parents, they do the best that they can, or maybe how they were raised, and it's just kind of this like trickle down effect. So I kind of wonder on one stance if like, dad, if that was really, if he knew kind of the implications of that, because he may have just been doing what he was doing, which may have been what his father did and the father before that, So that's like one piece. And then another thing, what you said about like, him and as far as the scientist and how he's going about getting his needs met, it's interesting because since his father was so like kind of directive and like, this is what you're gonna do, and there's like nothing else that is acceptable or what's been done in this family, it's like he didn't really get to form himself Like,
Mm-hmm.
didn't, usually it's like exploring, and then, essentially what he did, which was trying something out, it didn't go as well as he thought it would, and going back to the parent, and like you said earlier, based on what the parent says, it can, if the response is encouragement or something positive, or helping them to problem solve or critical think, it does help shape kind of the development and their creation of themselves, right? So it's like the main character, the scientist didn't really have that, and so he was just kind of doing like all these actions to like pulling from wherever, which it sounds like he got to his wit's end, where he was like, I'm just barging into this mall and everyone's just gonna do what I say, because that's kind of what happened to me. Did that make kind of sense? Did that make sense in a way? Like,
that's a good point, and I think that's kind of that's something I would say parents should keep in mind when reading this book, is that if any, more than anything, I would hope that a parent or even just an adult who has children in their life, that person reading the book just kind of stops and realizes how important the relationship aspect is. It's not necessarily what you say to a child that matters. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to fix their problems. That actually can do more harm than good. As you mentioned with the father, he doesn't seem like he was a bad guy. If you look at the pictures of the dad, he was smiling and just kind of like telling him about how everybody in the family has been doctors. But I think it came from a place of just trying to fix a problem without really trying to understand his son's pain, and trying to just kind of provide that reassurance of like, it's okay, you can like yarn. It's nothing that's wrong with you. That's okay if other people don't like it, and why don't we kind of see what else you can do with it? I don't think he was trying to be a bad dad. And I think that the takeaway should be for any adult reading this is kind of like what you said, which is, it has to do with the attachment piece, about learning how to model for the child, how to be empathetic, and also to just model for them that it's okay if things don't always go the way we want them to go, or the way, we hope them to go. If our outside experiences don't match what we're wanting to happen, our internal desires, right? Like him wanting everybody to like yarn and to help his business kind of like take off. What really matters is, are you being authentic? Are you being true to yourself? And learning that at some point you will find a way. You will find other people who like what you like, who are like you too, who will understand you. And it's about just being able to tolerate the discomfort that happens when maybe it's a moment where that's not happening, right? For example, him, not being able to sell his yarn and keep that business going. That was a moment where maybe it wasn't the right time or place or space to be able to find people that were like-minded or that had similar interests. But that doesn't mean that he should completely throw away that interest or that hobby or that idea of selling it or connecting with people about that. So really what matters is just kind of being there for the child, for your friend, for your partner, for whoever it is, adult or child, listening, offering the support, and saying, hey, I'm still here, I still love you. Regardless of the outcome, whether you become a doctor, whether your yarn business takes off, it doesn't matter,
Definitely. Yeah, and I would say too, this is a great book for parents or pretty much anyone that, is around kids. This book goes to show too that it doesn't necessarily have to be a parent figure, although that is wonderful. It could be any other prominent person in the child's life, whether it's a teacher or a friend of the family or uncle or, whoever. Right? It could be a lot of different people. And I would say too, to add what you were saying, also if we think like application, right? That's kind of what we do sometimes in therapy, is like how to apply it, right? And you made some really, really good points about the application process and what parents can do. And what I would add too is there is this pull, right, with parents, is to not want to see someone, it's difficult seeing kids struggle, and the go-to thing is to try really hard to help with a solution, or an outcome, and that's great, but also thinking about, just, we call this reflection when it comes to the young children. They're still developing their language, right? And they're feeling a lot of things, but they may not necessarily know like what words to put with it. It's just kind of all jumbled. Like they're feeling things, but they're still figuring out like how to make sense of it. And one thing we also say too is just kind of speaking for them in a sense, kind of, and it sounds, at first it's kind of like awkward, but almost just reflecting back like what their experience is, like, wow, like I could see that you're really upset right now. Yes, that didn't feel good, and you feel sad, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So also,
Yeah.
Also giving them that language of like what the emotion is, and then they can start putting words to their experiences, and that really does help along the way. And then it also helps the parents and other authority figures around to know like what the child's feeling if they're in this really distressed moment. Sometimes they don't know like what the emotion is, but eventually they start to build a language, and it's really, really helpful too when the parents and other adults or older kids or teens or whoever that are around them that just kind of say like, wow, I see what you're feeling, in a sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thanks again, Melissa, for being here. This was fun. Just so that people know, if they want to find out more about you, is there anywhere, like a website or anything that people could go to if they wanted to just find out a little more about you, where you are, and services and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I have a blog that I'm working on. It's a WordPress blog. The address is attachmentandidentity.wordpress.com. We'll put the link somewhere in the description for this podcast. But that's a blog that, I'm focusing on this age group that this book was made for. So, the newborn to 5-year-olds. I write about different topics, kind of like developmental milestones. I focus a lot on attachment personally, and for that blog. Some things I may talk about in terms of attachment might be like how to lay the foundation for a positive attachment style with your child or with a child. And just other resources that might be helpful for that age group.
Great. Yeah, we'll definitely put the link to your blog site in the show notes. Okay. Well, everyone, thanks for listening. Hopefully this was informative or helpful. If you have any book suggestions or books you would like discussed on this podcast, you can email it to booksbetweensessions@gmail.com. This podcast will include not just children's books like today, but middle grade, young adult, adult, fiction, nonfiction, self-help. And if you're a mental health professional and would like to be on this podcast, go ahead and contact us at booksbetweensessions@gmail.com. Also, this podcast is not psychotherapy or counseling. If you need to speak with a professional, you should find one local to you and contact them directly. If this is an emergency, please contact your local emergency number or go to your nearest emergency department. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.